All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Come Reason Ministries discussion of whether you could be moral without God. I did two parts of this previously, so go check those out. If you didn't see my discussion with Sam Rosen, who's a friend of mine, you could go check that out. So, quite a few videos. I still have more of the TikTok stuff to post. Hey, Zachman. Zachman gets 1,000 lance loot for being the first one here. We're seeing if there's anybody else that's going to pop up. We will see. We will see. Where is this? Is that the right thing? No, that's not it. Whatever. Okay, whatever. It doesn't matter that much. I'm missing something here that I was expecting to see on the screen, but it doesn't matter that much. Let's just get started on the video and let's get right into it. This is a little bit before where we left off, so it'll give us a few seconds of leeway for me to adjust volume and stuff. And anyway, let's just get going.
Obligations and duty.
Oh, I should say what I'm doing in case you're a first-time listener. So on this channel, this is Lance Independent. I am Lance Bush. I have a PhD in psychology, a master's in philosophy. I do philosophy and psychology. I mix the two. I do interdisciplinary research. I focus on the psychology of metaethics. So I study how people think about moral realism and anti-realism. Do non-philosophers have views about these sorts of issues? And that's really the sort of tip of a much deeper iceberg, which is an interest I have in the relation between philosophy as an academic discipline and regular everyday life. I think that a lot of contemporary analytic philosophy is the sort of recent Anglophone extension of Western philosophy, largely confined to Western Europe and the United States and the Anglophone world more generally, like Australia and stuff. Anyway, so I think that it has become so formalistic that it has become, in a sense, inhuman and disconnected from everyday life and practical living. And I think that at the same time, analytic philosophers still take themselves to largely be building on how ordinary people, so to speak, or the folk or lay people that don't have a lot of formal training in philosophy, how they think, how they speak. I have the impression that philosophers see themselves as building on that and trying to either vindicate or repudiate various aspects of everyday ordinary experience and thought and the way that people speak. Uh, and I think that they're just very, very bad at this. And I think that they're very bad at this because facts about how ordinary people speak and think are questions for the empirical sciences. They're questions for psychologists and anthropologists and criminologists and linguists and historians and various other disciplines that directly engage with and interact with ordinary people. I don't think that a bunch of people, reading Hume in a library are really connecting with the way ordinary people think and speak. And I think that training in philosophy makes people become increasingly more distal from the way everyday people speak and think. And then philosophers take themselves to somehow be experts on the way that people really speak and think, implicit in the way that they speak, without actually talking to those people or engaging with them. No, they just examine sentences that they imagine a person could say outside any context, outside any actual practical application of the sentences. I think that basically their methods are terrible and their presumptions are wrong, and that there are very, very serious methodological problems and metaphilosophical problems with contemporary analytic philosophy, at least large swaths of it. And I think that's a problem. And so I apply that to my examination of a lot of discussions about morality. And when it comes to metaethics, I am, I'm really, got dogs barking. I One of the things I argue for is that it's not the case that most people are moral realists. And, a lot of philosophers argue about this. A lot of people assume non-philosophers are moral realists. Other people will say, no, 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 they're actually implicit anti-realists of whatever kind, non-cognitivists or relativists or something. I don't think any of this is the case. So, that is a whole thing in and of itself. But I apply the tools of what I do in mixing philosophy and psychology to examining discussions about metaethics. And I do this both for academic work in metaethics and popular discussion of metaethics. And if you're not familiar with that term, metaethics is just a branch of philosophy that deals with abstract questions about the nature of morality. The central one that concerns me is the question of whether there are objective or stance-independent moral truths. So that is truths about what's morally right or wrong that are true independent of the goals, standards, or values of any individuals or groups. Kind of like you would think about scientific facts. Our beliefs and attitudes don't make the periodic table what it is. That's how the world is. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else in the chat, so let's get into the video and let's get started.
Without the Christian basis, without God, and it's ingenious, but it's at the end of the day, for all kinds of reasons, inadequate, I think.
Okay.
One thing being is it doesn't really give us a reason to actually love people. And so,
Yeah, I think this is just the tail end of some other remarks he was making that are not especially relevant to what I'm examining. In the previous video, they got into utilitarianism a lot, and that was an issue. All right, I'm getting the freezing thing again. Oh, so many frustrations. Just getting started. I'm gonna have to figure that out because I don't know what's causing that. All right, well, let's keep going.
serve people.
So basically, I got to get to a point where they start talking about meta ethics again. So if there's a bit of them talking about other stuff, we may have to skip ahead. We may have to sit through some of it.
And
don't treat them as means to ends.
Where does Ayn Rand fit in this? She leans more Kantian, doesn't she?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say she's more toward the utilitarian side, but with a huge difference, because she hated utilitarianism.
Yeah.
So, but she doesn't think they're.
So I'm here to talk about meta ethics. I don't. It's not that these topics aren't interesting. It's just that's not what I'm here for. So I'm going to skip ahead to this.
And then whatever you do to maximize that, thinks is you can do to maximize that agent, because self-interest. What is to maximize?
There's a fundamental difference, and it's so
you can see how humans function, and the only moral duty is to maximize that.
Okay, yeah. So in all of these now with Christianity, there's a fundamental difference, and it's how does Christian morality understand its grounding? Because this is another thing, again, that when we talk with folks and we talk with atheists, they seem to confuse the meta-ethical question with the ethical question. It's not that you can't be ethical, it's that you don't have any good grounding for your ethics. And these are kind of the problem points that we've been pointing out. So how does Christianity then hold all this together?
Yeah, no, that's an important point, Lenny, about and I think there's a lot of common ground that Christians have normatively with people, normative ethics, even with, again, I think that utilitarians get some things right. And I think it's because utilitarians are created in the image of God too.
There's something interesting here about how they keep moving between normative ethics and meta ethics. There's nothing wrong with talking about both topics, but they move between them as if there weren't an important distinction between them. Utilitarian is like, just take whatever meta ethics you want on board, and then we could discuss normative ethics. But discussing utilitarianism as if it were a meta ethical position is a little strange. Like a question of grounding presumably is a meta ethical question. So let's settle that question first and then talk about the normative content of the view. I mean, I could imagine someone saying that the two are interrelated. And when I see discussions about these topics, sometimes, let's say, for instance, in fact, I'll give an example. If your meta-ethical position is one that is closely tied to the specific normative content, like if you think that there's some sort of, you have some acquaintance view or some sort of view about we have some sort of access to goodness qualia, something like what is it, Sharon Hewitt Rollette's view? Let me get the name of that book. And I think Neil has a similar view. Neil Sinababu, Sharon Hewitt Rollett. That's right. So let me post that in the chat. You could check her out. She's done a few podcasts. Maybe I should invite her on. It'd be cool to talk to her. But like, for instance, she has what is her book? I got to find the book. The Feeling of Value. That's the book. And so for a view like that, where the notion of goodness is one that's closely associated, like it's sort of just constitutive of the qualitative sense of goodness, that it has specific normative content. And so on views like that, I could see why someone would entangle meta-ethical and normative considerations, because they are sort of inextricably bound up in one another. But even if there are instances in which that would occur, I do think that it would be helpful to remain a lot more vigilant about keeping the distinction clear when it needs to be clear. Hans Bernard asks, have you ever reviewed or debated Joe? Do you mean Joe Schmid? His views on metaethics? If you're talking about majesty of reason, just let me know in the chat and then I can address that.
Kantians gets
Anyway, just the point is, metaethics and normative ethics are not the same thing. Sometimes one's metaethical views and normative views are closely linked together, and it would be reasonable to talk about the both at the same time in those contexts. But I don't think utilitarianism is one of them.
some things right. Both of them suffer from not from wanting to make it secularized, and it's just not able to be sufficient. But they can get onto some good things. And in fact, whatever their normative ethical views are, there are people who are atheists and who do good things and do right things, and that have character. In some cases, character that we can learn from, we can admire. Again, it's because they're made in the image of God. So the big question really is the meta-ethical question. Okay, so what is the foundation?
Yeah, so it might be that the guest here is recognizing that they dive into normative ethics once in a while, and then he brings it back to metaethics. And I've commented before that I think he does a good job of explaining the metaethical distinctions. It just seems a little weird when the discussion veers away from the metaethics that it seemed like it was centering on into normative ethics, but I don't know. It's maybe I shouldn't be too concerned with that. Hans clarifies, yeah, majesty of reason. By sheer coincidence, perhaps, I was just rewatching the discussion between Ask Yourself, that's Isaac, and Joe Schmid from Majesty of Reason on their discussion about moral realism. So I don't know. I haven't looked into whether Joe has a specific video articulating his views on moral realism, but it's not something that we've had much of a discussion about. I'm not sure, and Joe would be welcome. He sometimes pops into the live streams too. He would be welcome to clarify or comment on the matter. But Isaac and I have pretty similar approaches and views on meta ethics, and they had a complete discussion about it. I think that there would be more to discuss, and they bring up some possibilities at the end of that video where Isaac starts saying, it'd be really cool to get into our respective phenomenology here to see if there really are any phenomenological differences. So I do think a discussion with Joe would be productive, but I'm kind of aggressive on pursuing and being willing to have these conversations. I don't know what Joe would think, but he may look at the conversation with Isaac and just think, yeah, it's going to go the same way as that one. So, what's the point? And that would be an understandable reaction. I'm more enthusiastic about constantly talking about the same topic 10,000 times. I don't know if everybody else is. So, Joe produces a lot more diverse content than I do. I'm metaethics, a little bit of consciousness, back to metaethics. So, I'm open to that discussion. I don't know if he'd want to have that discussion. I have been on his channel before. We talked about some of my empirical work. So yeah, I would be open to that discussion. And I was actually thinking of reviewing that discussion next and giving some commentary on it. Oh, by the way, Hans, since you were the second person to comment, you get 500 Lance loot, and then Sapir gets 250 Lance loot. Greg John says, do you debate, Lance? Can I set up a debate between you and Synth on moral realism? They have an argument for moral realism. Yeah. So I'd be happy to have discussions. So yeah, just shoot me a comment or message me. You got my email is accessible here. We got to work out logistics and see what kind of debate, what kind of format. I don't like super structured debates. I am willing to do them under the right circumstances, but you get 5 minutes, you get 5 minutes. Not my favorite thing. But yeah, as long as just get in touch, and then we could work out the specifics. So sure. All right, that's it for now. Let's keep going.
Foundation here that's underlying your understanding of goodness and rightness and obligation and so on. And you might have some good stuff there, but it's insufficient. It's not fully grounded. So from a Christian perspective, our what we call in the book, our common moral experience. That is, if you look at, and this is relevant to something we were talking about at the very beginning, if you look throughout the history of philosophy and you look at what even critics of moral realism, critics of Christian ethics like J.L. Mackie, he says, no, this is the view of most people. It's built into our moral language. It's built into our moral concepts. It's built into the history of philosophy, of Plato and Aristotle and Kant, all these.
What specifically is built in? So if he's presupposing, if the claim is it's something like realism, okay. So I mean, take a look at what he says here.
It's of Christian ethics like J.L. Mackie. He says, no, this is the view of most people.
Okay, J.L. Mackie says this is the view of most people, and he does say stuff like that. How would Mackie know that? He just says it's the view, and this is something that there are a few comments from Mackie that indicate that he does think something like this, or at least that his goal is to capture the view of what most people think. But note here, let's take it all the way back.
And right.
This, I started this video by giving a little intro about how I cover what non-philosophers think about these things. And how fortuitous in this video they happen to get into that. I saw a short clip where they said something like this, but I didn't know it was coming up pretty much right away, right after we got past the normative stuff. But let's get into this.
An obligation and so on. And you might have some good stuff there, but it's insufficient. It's not fully grounded. So from a Christian perspective, our what we call in the book, our common moral experience.
Our common moral experience. So there's this reference to our, which I've pointed out many times. When you say our, it's important to be specific about who you're referring to. Do you mean all people, most people, all people that are adults with a well-developed conscience that are not suffering from various types of pathologies, psychopathologies of whatever kind? All competent people, all people that are not psychopaths, you can specify the sort of reference class, the category of people that you're referring to. All people in Western civilization, all people from 1922 onwards. You could be specific or you could be vague. I'm not requiring someone to be so specific that you would provide the social security numbers of every single person you're referencing. I'm not demanding that level of specificity, but our probably means something like, people in general. Like if I said, we are capable of speech, do I mean literally all humans are? No. If I say we have visual perception, does that mean all people have visual perception? No, but generally speaking. So this is a claim about how people generally think. That's an empirical claim about human psychology. And it's very strange for philosophers, theologians, Christian apologists, whoever, to just say, this is our experience. Do you have other people's experiences? No, you don't. So, you could say people use mental imagery. Not everybody. You could say people have an internal monologue. Not everybody. And we don't know to what extent these various capacities, how much culture, language acquisition, various types of experiences, individual differences in people's personal histories. There are a variety of factors that can potentially contribute to rather substantial cognitive and phenomenological differences between different populations and subpopulations and cultures and communities. We are not in a position, and by we, I mean literally all human beings, we, all humans, are not currently in a position to make sweeping empirical claims about the nature of human experience without providing substantive empirical evidence to support such claims. And yet, people that are not psychologists or anthropologists or historians or other people that are experts specifically at studying how people think about metaethics constantly make claims about how people think about metaethics. I actually study how people think about metaethics by doing actual empirical research. And it is profoundly frustrating for people to go around just making claims about how people think about metaethics and not think that this is as unacceptable, epistemologically speaking, as if I were to just come on here and say, we experience our anger this way, or we experience food this way, and just make claims about our taste phenomenology or the nature of human personality. We have, 4 personality traits. How do I know this? Because I introspect and I realize I have 4 main personality traits. Introspection is not a good way to figure out how human personality works. Personality psychology is an extremely complicated affair that involves trying to, identify this factor structure, devise valid measures, test them cross-culturally, validate the measures in various sorts of ways. It's extremely difficult just to figure out the factor structure of human personality and to distinguish the degree to which there are these universal features of human personality. It's really, really hard to do to figure out something relatively straightforward like personality traits. It's very difficult to do when you have data from thousands of people with decades and decades of much higher quality research with much larger sample sizes that are systematically gathered using reasonably or at least somewhat validated measures. Like these are people, the people using like the Big Five personality test are not pulling these measures out of nowhere. It's not coming out of their bums. This is stuff people have worked hard to develop, and it's still a controversial matter, and it's still difficult to it's reasonable to question, is there really a 5-factor structure? Maybe there's 2 factors, maybe there's 6, maybe there's 13. It's still an open question. And again, that's for something as basic and fundamental to humanity as personality traits. And personality traits can largely be evaluated by looking at behavior and outcomes like conscientiousness or agreeableness. You could observe a person's behavior. What kind of behavior can you observe to determine whether a person is a quasi-realist or an expressivist or an error theorist? There's not a lot of behavior to latch onto. And so, when you're talking about how non-philosophers think about abstract issues in meta-ethics, you're dealing with a much more ephemeral phenomena that's much harder to investigate empirically. We have like way less data on it, and to the extent that there is data on it, almost nobody talking about this ever actually cites the data. I would be blown away if someone cited we have the 2003 paper by Sean Nichols and Folds Bennett. So Nichols and Folds Bennett that shows children reliably are responsive to differences between taste and moral considerations in a way that is indicative of an early emergent capacity for engaging in moral judgment in a way that supports moral realism. And we have the 2008 Goodwin and Darley paper where they found that on average, people treated the moral issues presented in the study more like objective matters of fact than they did like matters of taste and preference. I don't think that's a good interpretation of the 2008 paper. And you have a whole bunch of issues with how when you draw out a particular sample of moral issues, how representative are they of the moral domain? We pick a dozen controversial issues. Everyone's going to give these anti-realist or relativistic type responses. If you give a bunch of uncontroversial ones, they'll all look like moral realists. So there are major issues with how you go about devising and implementing the stimuli that you use. And that study has significant methodological problems. It's a cool study. Don't get me wrong. And it's cool that they gathered open response data and stuff like that. But there's been development since then. But the point is, no one even mentions these studies. It's not like anyone's actually pointing to substantive empirical data to support the claims that they make. They rely on, I don't know what it is, established inertia. Like it's just people just assume people are moral realists historically and globally, in the almost total absence of any empirical evidence to support these claims. And I should say, at present, the best available empirical evidence, at least on participants in the United States, found super high rates of consistent anti-realism, which is Pulzer and Wright paper from 2021. Now, I've had some people criticize, why do you appeal to that paper if you think it has problems? Because it has less problems. And so what you're seeing, I think, when you look at the studies that have been conducted within the populations that have been evaluated, is as the methods have improved, the anti-realist rates go up. So does that mean people are anti-realist? I don't think so. I think that there are huge sampling issues with these studies. I don't think that they're representative of the general population, in large part because they often draw on college samples and on MTurk samples, which are disproportionately MTurk samples from the U.S., which are disproportionately non-religious or atheist leaning. And so the samples in question would probably be more likely to give anti-realist responses relative to other populations if people had views about realism and anti-realism. So I don't really accept the results as representative of people in general, but just the general point is no one talks about this research. So they make empirical claims. They don't talk about the empirical data. It's pretty frustrating. Okay. So I'm going to have more to say about this because this is important stuff.
That is, if you look at, and this is relevant to something we were talking about at the very beginning, if you look throughout the history of philosophy and you look at what even critics of moral realism, critics of Christian ethics like J.L. Mackie, he says, no, this is the view of most people.
Right. So again, how would Mackie be in a position to know that? Simple. He wouldn't be in a position to know that.
It's built into our moral language. It's built into our moral
that can be contested. I don't think realism is built into our moral language.
Concepts.
I don't think it is built into our concepts. And so you see, what's really strange is sometimes I question whether any of this is true, and people will defend the claim that that moral realism is presupposed in our language and our concepts, but then they'll treat it like it's not an empirical claim. If you're making claims about how people speak and how people think, you're making empirical claims. You're making claims about human behavior, speech is behavior, and you're making claims about human psychology, concepts. To the extent that anybody has or lacks any particular concept, that's a claim about their psychology. These are empirical claims, and we are not entitled to just presume that we know the answers to these from the armchair. We're just not.
It's built into the history of philosophy.
I don't think that it is. I mean, it might be a running theme in Western philosophy, but even if that's the case, how much has Western philosophy directly impinged on and shaped the thinking of non-philosophers? You know, are non-philosophers typically Platonists or anti-Platonists about mathematics? A point that Michael Gill questions. Probably not. So, you know, do most people have a view about whether they're B theorists or A theorists about time? Do they one box or two box in Newcomb's problem? No, people don't have views about these things, not typically. And they don't have views about them unless they go study philosophy. And most people don't study philosophy, or at least they don't study it enough to form substantive, definitive views about these things. They might have some vague sense that they kind of, in college, they encountered something and they kind of favored one thing over another, but that doesn't tell you a whole lot. So, you know, there seems to be this assumption philosophers generally have, not just for meta ethics, but more generally, that all the categories and distinctions that are represented in philosophy, or at least many of them, are reflected in the way that people implicitly already speak and think. This just seems to be another psychological assumption that philosophers, for whatever reason, have just run with, again, without checking or verifying or testing or doing any work to see, do people think this way? Imagine supposing, for instance, that if you encountered people like I don't know, an uncontacted society living in an island that we somehow missed. I mean, it's not realistic in today's world, but let's suppose it happened. And you assume that the people would either be like Trinitarians or non-Trinitarians about Christianity. That makes no sense. They wouldn't know anything about Christianity, so they would be like, we don't know what that is. Why would we have a view about that? They're not going to be anti-Trinitarian because they're not going to know what the Trinity is enough to reject it. You know, to give you a really silly example, you know, imagine I went back in a time machine and I started asking people 1,000 years ago, like, what's your favorite Hollywood movie, or what's your favorite Pokemon? They don't have a view. It's not like they're anti-Pikachu. They just don't have a view. So when it comes to philosophical issues, why would we assume that these issues are implicit in the way people speak and think? Now, philosophers might say, well, our theories and categories and distinctions are actually drawn from our intuitions and our ways of speaking and our ways of thinking. And we were ordinary people before we did philosophy. It's not like we're aliens. I question that. So, you know, just because they come up with categories and distinctions for some problem that they've purportedly identified, or some question that they've put to ordinary thought, doesn't mean that the solutions that they come up with are reflected in ordinary thought in some implicit, inchoate, underdeveloped way. They don't have to be there. You could invent new categories and distinctions, and I think that's exactly what philosophers do. And for whatever reason, they think it's implicit there. They haven't shown, like, you know, just take like the whole free will thing. There's this psychology of free will research where they try to figure out whether people are libertarians about free will, or they're compatibilists or incompatibilists. Why think they're any of these? Why? I haven't heard a good reason to think that people do already have views about this. So philosophers might say, well, as philosophers, our free will intuitions are actually drawn from and based on the intuitions of ordinary people. Are they? That's an empirical claim. Where's the evidence for that? So, you know, there's just a lot of empirical assumptions that motivate many of the questions and problems posed in philosophy. And there's all this sort of the sense in which empirical presuppositions are lurking in the background, but philosophers don't want to address or deal with them. It's like they have an allergy to the empirical sciences, even though they rely on them to a great deal. And then they'll turn around and say that all these empirical considerations are irrelevant. Well, if they're irrelevant, then you're not in a position to both draw on them and then say that they don't matter. It's real weird. All right, let's have a look at the chat and then we'll keep going with the video. Greg John says, when you ask for a demonstration of the existence of a moral fact, I don't think I asked for a demonstration of the existence of a moral fact. That it makes it sound like I'm expecting a physical object, which of course moral facts aren't physical objects. So that sounds a little strange. I don't know what that would mean. Are you talking about stance independent reasons? No, not necessarily. Not what so whether something is a moral fact just depends on what we mean by moral fact. Anti-realists can believe in moral facts. They don't have to be stance independent. So no, I don't take a moral fact to be equivalent to a stance independent moral fact. Stance independent moral fact would be a proposed type of moral fact. And appeals to reasons may or may not figure in a particular account of moral realism. So it wouldn't have to be reasons. But I also just wouldn't have asked for a demonstration of the existence of a moral fact. I don't recall asking for that. Giacomo says, what type of realist position in specific are they advocating for? It's not clear. Presumably some type of non-naturalism, but I don't know. Yeah, James Apperson says, it honestly amazes me that the free will debate is still happening anywhere. Right, yeah. So I'm a free will quietist. I think the whole debate is ridiculous. In academic philosophy, the big question is like, do we have the conditions necessary for desert-based moral responsibility? I don't think desert-based moral responsibility is a thing. So who cares? This is a pointless question. Do we meet the criteria for something that I think is either nonsensical or it's not real? I'm not terribly concerned with whether humans have the capacity that, like, whether their metaphysical conditions are met or the psychological conditions are met for us to have that. Who cares about that? So, contemporary analytic philosophy, its way of dealing with free will seems to focus a lot on, do we have the free will side? But why not go after the moral responsibility side of thing? Sorry, I can't talk. Side of things. Just like missing pluralizations. I just think this, hey, is there a connection between A and B? I don't think there's an A or a B. I think it's a complete waste of time. So sometimes people want to draw silly practical implications. Oh, so if people aren't morally responsible, we'd have to let everybody out of prison and just let people do whatever they want. No, we can, have a criminal justice system and a legal system and various methods of incentivizing people to do some things and other things for practical reasons. We don't have to have metaphysical truths dictating what we're justified in doing or not. So I think the whole quest is for free will is a profound waste of time, both among incompatibilists and compatibilists. So libertarians and compatibilists, I think it's kind of embarrassing that compatibilism is the most popular view among philosophers. Compatibilism between free will and what? Like, who cares? Compatibilism between free will and what? Compatibilism between determinism and what? Like what? Whenever you get these accounts of free will, a lot of them end up looking really trivial, like the capacity to do what we want or act in accord with our desires. Okay, yeah. So do we have the ability to act in accord with our desires, even if determinism is true? Of course we do. So compatibilism is true. Okay, well, is that the correct account of free will? Well, I don't think there are correct accounts of free will or not. We get to use words how we want. So we have that. We don't have some sort of contra-causal ability. I don't think. Some other people might. So just pick what you want to call free will. If you want to call it what compatibilists are talking about, then sure, we have that. So I'm a compatibilist, trivially. In that sense, like a capacity to act in accord with your desires or something. But once you establish that, a lot of the compatibilist accounts for establishing that we have free will strike me as fairly trivial. Like whether or not determinism is true, sure, people can act in accord with their desires or something, whatever it is for your compatibilist account. Okay, now what do we do with that? Yeah, so this is supposed to sustain some view about how, well, since people can act in accord with their values, even if determinism is true, then even if determinism is true, people could still be held what? Morally responsible, blameworthy, praiseworthy? We could do all that anyway. What do they need to have free will for? You could praise people, you could blame people, you could hold people responsible. Why do they need free will? So if you say, oh, well, we need to make distinctions between instances in which we would attribute these characteristics to people and ones in which we wouldn't, and that's whatever that is, that's free will. Okay, so free will is like a placeholder term for what? A practical question about how you want to run society? Or are you trying to figure out what's true, independent of how you want to run society? So if it's the latter, why would I base the legal system, the criminal justice system, like the norms and laws and governing my society on like what's true, independent of whether it serves my interest or the interests of society? What if the moral facts, whatever they would be, actually made society worse by our lights? Why would we want to comply with them? I don't think that we would. And so what I think we really should be doing is asking more constructive bottom-up questions, which is what kind of society do we want to have? How do we want to treat people? Okay, so if a person commits a crime, was the person forcibly injected with hallucinogens? Okay, well, maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to throw them in jail because it's not going to be an effective deterrent because the person, wasn't intentionally acting in the first place. And so you could ask all these practical questions about what would you expect a person to do? What is this punishment likely to do to a person? And all of those questions can be asked and answered without ever addressing any big metaphysical questions about whether we have free will of any particular kind or not. None of those questions are particularly interesting or important or helpful. We get to choose how we run our societies. We're not subordinate to whatever the quote unquote moral facts are. Who cares? Who cares? If they don't align with what we want, fuck them. I'm not just ignore them. And if they do, great. Then we didn't need them in the first place. So they're either something to ignore because they are not aligned with our goals and values, in which case, why comply with them? Or they are aligned with our goals and values, in which case we were already going to be inclined to do that anyway. So what do we need the moral facts for? The whole thing is ridiculous. Who cares? So we could be asking and trying to address all these practical questions. What kind of society do we want? How do we want to live our lives? And instead, people are trying to do this like, my intuitions and figure out what's true, as if, if it turned out it didn't align with what they wanted, they would do it. I don't think they would. So there's something very weird about the methods that people are taking. Yeah, I just dropped an F-bomb, so I don't know if Come Reason Ministries is going to review my video now, and maybe they want to keep it PG or something. I don't know. Well, I say that, but then the kinds of examples that moral realists frequently give of like genocide and the worst possible things humans can do, not particularly PG. So I think an F-bomb's not quite as bad. Yeah, so I have it's telling me here on it's telling me that my internet connection is unstable. It's only unstable in StreamYard. So, I am plugged directly. I'm plugged in directly with the Ethernet cord, and my speed is like, I don't know, like 800 megabytes a second. So I don't know what the issue would be with why it's so slow. So I'm going to have to troubleshoot this again because, I got this new computer. I moved to a new place, got a new internet connection, and the issue was gone. And now it just came back. Don't know what happened. So I'll have to work on that. Anyway, let's have a look in the chat. Oh, wow. Lots of comments since that last one. Spears says, hi, James. Greg Jones says, what do you mean by moral fact? There's not a particular account I would give. So it's kind of a placeholder term for the various accounts people could give about what a moral fact is. So nothing in particular. Just going through the chat here. So Beer says, Lance doesn't deny morals exist. By the way, anti-realism is consistent with the existence of morals, just that the morals are dependent on stances in anti-realism. Well, an anti-realist could deny that there's stance-dependent morals too. So anti-realism is just, there's no stance-independent moral truths. Whether or not there are stance-dependent ones would just be another question. So relativists might think that there are. An error theorist or an expressivist might not think that there are. Oh, hey, Stan's here. What's up, Stan?
Plato and Aristotle and Kant, all these guys, that reality is a real, I mean, morality is a real thing. It's objective. It's not merely a function of how we like to think about it. It's factual. It's when we make a
Note, by the way, an anti-realist, even if you're a stance-dependent theorist, like a relativist, that does not mean that you think the moral truth is whatever you like to think about it, because you could find yourself. So it might be that, like, if you like something, or if you consider something moral, that makes it moral. But that is itself, you don't have this like second order capacity necessarily to decide what it is that you like or what it is that you prefer. So you may just find that you happen to consider some things moral and other things immoral because you prefer certain things and you disprefer other sorts of things. But that is itself not necessarily under your volitional control. Sometimes when people frame anti-realism, they make it seem like it's a matter of whim and it's arbitrary, and you could just up and decide that the moral truths are some other set of truths, and that this makes moral relativism or stance-dependent accounts more generally especially volatile. And this is not necessarily true. I mean, it's possible to defend a view that where people have that ability. I don't think people have that ability, and I think that that would be a very weird thing to suppose about people, psychologically speaking. I don't choose what my food or music preferences are. So, there's this consistent inability to frame relativism in a more charitable way that I see from its critics. And it's pretty frustrating to see. And here, it's not that he's necessarily mischaracterizing it. It's just that I think that the framing is a little unclear there.
moral judgment, like it's wrong to torture children for fun. That's a statement that's true or false, and we all are absolutely convinced it's true.
Did you say we're all?
Make a moral judgment, like it's wrong to torture children for fun. That's a statement that's true or false, and we all are absolutely convinced it's true.
Does he mean we're convinced it's true in a stance independent way or true in a non-stance independent way? I mean, one, not everybody's convinced that that's true, so that's not true. Like in any respect, even stance dependent respect. Some people are okay with killing people or whatever. But then if he's implying that this is something that we all think in some realist way, that's not true either.
And so that's what we call common moral experience. It's a generally shared view that everybody, including the critics, agree is the way most people think of it. It's the way.
Okay, let me be very clear. I do not agree. I don't agree. So look what he says here.
We call common moral experience. It's a generally shared view that everybody, including the critics, agree is the way most people think of it.
Okay, I don't agree this is the way most people think of it. And here he said most people. So most people, so some majority of the world's population. There is, at present, absolutely no compelling empirical evidence that would support the claim that most people are moral realists or that this is a feature of their experience. Like they experience morality in a way that would suggest that they themselves, not that moral realism is true, but that they themselves experience the world as if moral realism were true. Like they experience what they take to be stance independent moral truths, or that something about their experience would lend them to believe this either implicitly or explicitly. There's just no empirical evidence to support this claim. And so I don't know why people continue to make this claim. It's never been supported. It's not like there was empirical evidence and it all disappeared. We've never had empirical evidence to support this. So I would love for people that think most people are moral realists to reach out to me and come talk to me, because I want to know why they think this. And I've had a bunch of disputes with people about these sorts of claims, and they never have good arguments. In my experience, I've never seen a good argument for this. It's almost always anecdotes in my experience, or bad armchair analytic tests of like English sentences. So, if you think most people are moral realists, reach out to me. I don't think that that's true, and I don't think that people will be able to support the claim that it's true.
It's the way most thoughtful people have thought about it.
It's the way most thoughtful people. I mean, there's a kind of normative dig. So I've thought about it. So, and I totally disagree. Am I not thoughtful? So most thoughtful people, that might technically be true if you go by the current Phil Paper survey data. You got 62% moral realists, but that's a pretty recent number. So anti-realism was very likely. We don't have data on this, but we have enough reports, and this is a small community, so it's more plausible that they would have accurate information about this. Moral anti-realism was very, very popular among academic philosophers, at least in analytic philosophy in the early and mid 20th century. Was it the majority? Probably. Can we prove this? No. But, the proportion of people that are favorable towards realism, ebbs and rises and falls in philosophy, and it may or may not be particularly diagnostic of anything in particular about the, it doesn't mean that we're converging on philosophers all agreeing that this is true. But that's of course a separate question for whether most people think this way. Even if most philosophers, have thought about the topic and are moral realists, it doesn't mean they've been especially thoughtful about it. I mean, among other things, although we can just grant for the sake of argument that they are. But even if they are, that's not particularly good evidence that most non-philosophers are moral realists. And the other thing I'll note about this, sometimes people will treat philosophers as if they're experts on ordinary thought. They're not. I don't know where people get this idea. So people say, well, philosophers like J.L. Mackie are pointing to other philosophers agree most people are moral realists. Well, who cares what philosophers think? Okay, you're going to ask philosophers about what the causes of diseases are? You're going to ask philosophers about the causes of natural disasters? Most philosophers agree that mudslides are caused by, who cares? They're not in a position to know these sorts of questions. So philosophers are not the relevant experts for, are most people moral realists? That's not, they don't study psychology, or some of them do. So, it's not most of them. So most of them wouldn't have this information. They might even reject the information if it were given to them. So I don't know why people would appeal to what philosophers think about this stuff.
So now we ask, so that's what that's pointing to is what we call moral realism. That is that morality is real, moral values, moral facts, art, moral properties are real parts of the world. They are objective. That moral judgments are cognitive, that is that they're true or false. And that we can know morality. That's all moral realism. So our common moral experience points to moral realism. And
as I've said, there is no empirical evidence to support the claim that our common moral experience points to moral realism. That's not supported by available data.
As we seek to show.
By the way, I do have an interview with Joe Schmidt over at Majesty of Reason where I go into this in a bit of detail. You could also check my work on this. You could also check my blog where I summarize and discuss the empirical work on this. If, maybe it would be helpful if someone really wants, throw a comment at me, I could post some references in the comment section after this video, and then I could pin it so people could check out some of the sources.
In the book, moral realism points to grounding in a kind of theistic grounding, because, and as we seek to show in the book, moral realism points to grounding in a kind of theistic grounding, because some people are moral realists. They want to affirm these things, but they want to be philosophical naturalists and say, no, there's no God, and so on. These are just brute facts that emerge somehow in a process that nobody can explain when people are highly evolved enough, and they just exist, and there are these moral duties, and they're just things that are there. And as some philosophers have said, they're like duties that are floating around waiting to be obeyed. It's like, why should we think they're real? I mean, what's the explanation? Maybe it's possible that they just exist. But if you want to ask, okay, what's the best explanation? What kind of worldview actually makes sense out of this, where you would expect to find it? It would be a worldview in which ultimate reality is not just bare stuff. And it's not even a set of principles. Ultimate reality is a person, a moral person. In fact, it's a triune, it's a trinity of loving relationships. I mean, that's actually the sort of picture of reality where morality goes deep. It's exactly what we would expect to find. And so from a Christian perspective, morality is responding to God. It's responding in gratitude and obedience. And seeing morality is not the only thing in the world. It's not even necessarily the most important thing in the world. It's a hugely important thing. But it's one way that we respond to God in gratitude and obedience. And it works together with our spiritual needs, our emotional needs, as well as our moral needs.
Yeah, we talked with that.
Yeah, I don't know what any of the latter part of what he said has to do with moral realism. And, this is something I've asked before. Is there any scriptural basis regarding Christianity as favoring moral realism? We've discussed this in previous videos. I think I'm going to run with the operating assumption that the answer is no, because I just haven't seen any passages that would sustain the notion that, moral realism is true, is some sort of like Christian doctrine you could read out of the Bible. Now, there are these like classical theistic conceptions of God as this like perfect being or something like that. Does perfect have to be understood in a realist way? If so, why? and who decided on that, and when was that determined? And yeah, again, is that something to read off of the scripture, or is that something that was established as a matter of some sort of, is that some entrenched dogma that a bunch of philosophers all agreed on that's not so obviously grounded in a direct reading of Christianity? I'm not at all saying I need to see a passage in the Bible that says moral realism is true. I don't know if there's any passages in the Bible that say the Trinity is the correct interpretation of Christianity, but I'll take Christians' word for it that that's a reading you get from extrapolating from various passages in the Bible. So it's not like I think that you can't extrapolate, but show me the line of inference where you extrapolate from the Bible to moral realism. And again, I'm not saying that there isn't one. There are things to say after that. Maybe you could convince me that's the most plausible reading of the Bible, that it entails moral realism. If that's the case, I will note that that does not mean that most everyday people that identify as Christians are moral realists. So a lot of people say theism entails moral realism. Well, let's say some specific philosophical conception of classical theism entails moral realism. Is that the conception that most ordinary people have when they think about God? That's an empirical question. It's real weird when philosophers will try to just make inferences. Well, this is the classic conception, so that's what people believe, so they must think this. Not at all. So people might say, like, look, it's an official Catholic doctrine that abortions are wrong, or at least under most circumstances. But does the Catholic Church's official stance on abortion match what happens if you actually survey people that identify as Catholic? Nope. And we do have survey data on that. So, and it's pretty definitive. A lot of Catholics just disagree with the church. So you cannot infer what a person's beliefs are merely by looking at their nominal religious identity. So if someone says they're Catholic, you don't just get to go to the Vatican and say, what are the official tenets of the Catholic Church? That's what that person believes. Nope. That's not how that works. Facts about what that person believes are specific to that person. And you would have to survey the people that call themselves Catholics and figure out what they think. You don't get to just infer what people believe from looking at a book. That's not how that works. So again, philosophers like to scoff at scientists who say, oh, philosophy's dead. Sure. Okay, fine. And they're often correct to do that. But philosophers have a inadequate regard for the value of psychology, and more generally, in many instances, an inadequate regard for the importance of the sciences. Now, I'm not saying all philosophers do. There's philosophers of science that are going to maybe be, on the same page as me, or maybe even more gung-ho about science than I am. But, you still get a lot of philosophers that will just make sweeping claims about how people speak or think without any supporting evidence. It's real weird.
Adam Johnson on his book Divine Love Theory, which is a kind of similar idea in that.
Yeah. So moral realism points to a theistic basis, and that would be great. But I think what Adam Johnson has successfully argued is that there's a kind of theistic basis, a Christian theistic basis, a Trinitarian theistic basis that is better than just theism. Because relationality and mutual love and reciprocity is in the deepest heart of things. It's not just a kind of mysterious thing. Well, why? Even if it could exist, and it's not clear that on a naturalist view, these things could even exist. But supposing they do, they're ungrounded. They're just floating about. And so if you follow the kind of strategy of inference to the best explanation, okay, we've got these phenomena, we've got these things to be explained. What's the best explanation? It's just really clear.
Right. So,
it gives us a ground for obligation, as you were talking about, because we are obligated to our Creator and our benefactor.
Well, let's take a contrary view, though. Let's look at an Eastern philosophy. The idea that there's a law of karma. This law seems to be etched into the universe. It seems to be something that from which no one can escape. So there is an objective nature to it, but I've always had the problem with the Eastern views, and it seems like the idea of progression of again reliving and experiencing the suffering in order to advance to a state of nirvana, whatever way you define that. The problem is somebody's making judgments. The karmic law somehow is saying this is good and this is bad, but I don't know where those judgments are. I don't know what the function is that's doing the judging. And how do we parse that out? What do you see as the problems of objectivism in an Eastern framework?
Well, it's really interesting. You've probably thought about it more than I have, but I think you're right. There are actually there seem to be moral judgments or value judgments, shall we say, of good and evil here that underwrite this whole thing. And but what's the grounding for that? What kind of picture of ultimate reality makes sense out of that? And one kind of interesting thing is in a lot of those the Eastern views, the more monistic ones, in Hinduism, for example, ultimately all distinctions are unreal. They're can't remember what the right word is.
Well, the way they say you are like a drop of water, and your goal is to lose yourself in part of the sea.
So there's no real distinction between you and anything else, but there's also no real Maya. That's the word I was looking for. The proper state of consciousness is one in which all individuality dissolves away, all particularities are gone, and you see that there's a single undifferentiated oneness. Well, then,
I should just say, I don't know enough about Eastern philosophy to comment meaningfully on this. So anybody in the chat, I know that some people here know more about Eastern philosophy. I don't know if you're in the chat. If you are, feel free to weigh in and comment on it. And if it looks like it's addressing this, then I can throw some of it up here. Let me say hi to, is it Captain Kim? You always leave just like this kind of gesture or something. Like some remark like, hey, like, it seems positive on my videos. So I do appreciate those. I always see those. It's really cool just to see someone just say, good job, instead of having to throw in a comment or a question that, you don't have to put a lot of thought into these comments. I do appreciate when people do that too, though. So I do appreciate that, so yeah, I've seen you commenting on some recent things. So I do appreciate it. Few random comments. Not sure anything should go up here. Yeah, there we go. See, that's where it's at. Appreciate it.
Distinction between good and evil is an illusion.
Right.
And so the whole basis of having a morality, which rides on the distinction between good and evil, it's morality itself is ultimately an illusion. So that's not a basis for morality. That's a denial of morality. It's a removal of morality.
Yeah, ultimately, morality itself isn't real in that regard. And Buddhism, in some sense, although the idea of Buddhism is to be, like a candle snuffed out, right? While Hinduism, you join into the whole, you kind of decrease. I don't know if those are distinctions without a difference ultimately, but it still has this problem, and even the Brahmin can't escape karma. So to me, karma falls into this Euthyphro dilemma problem. And you have to say, well, then again, what grounds goodness? How does it, how does it distinguish, or how does it be? How does it become in that regard?
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like it might not. I mean, it might be calling it good and evil and so on, but if it's just a kind of non-personal churning of things, reciprocity. If you acted this way, then you're going to get this. It's not clear that at all that you could make a distinction between good and evil there. It's just sameness or something like that.
Yeah. This is why I've wrestled with it myself, trying to say I just don't understand ultimately how it can be a foundation of a moral system.
Yeah.
So one of the things that let's do a hypothetical. Let's say there's a capacity to do something that even in the maybe by yourself, maybe there's the idea of doing good just for the sake of doing good, say lying on your taxes. Maybe it doesn't change your tax return or something like that. Maybe it doesn't make you pay more, but there's a concept within Christendom that you shouldn't lie, because lying itself is wrong. As we say, it's objectively wrong. And even if it doesn't affect other people, you still don't do it because it's not what God would have done in your stead. Are there other systems that offer that same kind of framework?
Well, Kantianism would say something like that, I think. It wouldn't say because
But Kantianism won't have any exceptions, right? It will,
Right,
like
there's
lying
no
is always wrong. Hey, if the Jews are in
Yeah, it seems like it's back to normative ethics. All right, let's skip ahead.
the attic,
scenario that a utilitarian might. The overall, Ayn Rand would say, yes, you should do it. Affect other people. That I can produce then in the good to, because it's unfair. But would I want everybody to do this? And no, okay, well then I shouldn't do it. Maybe we can get there. Respond to an earlier point you made, which was about what difference. And no, okay, well then I shouldn't do it.
Okay, so as we get ready to wrap up, let me ask you a couple of kind of more practical questions.
Okay.
First of all, where does this play out? How do we use this? How is this more than just kind of abstract knowledge? Oh, does this influence legislation? Does this influence how we treat other people? How do we take this idea of meta ethics, grounding the good in God, and kind of use it on the street, so to speak?
Well, I don't know about how we use it on the street, but I'll respond to maybe we can get there. Respond to an earlier point you made, which was about what difference does it make, for people. And it led in the book we cite a study by some psychologists who say that the three major causes for the current massive increase in anxiety and depression is the fast pace of life and stress, our individualism, our excessive individualism, lack of community, and the conviction that moral relativism is the only moral option. Massive increase in anxiety and depression is the fast pace of life and stress, our individualism, our excessive individualism, lack of community, and the conviction that moral relativism is the only moral option.
Yeah, it's interesting. If most people are moral realists, then why would someone think that it's a widespread social problem that most people are moral relativists? Like, how widespread is the relativism? Because if they're relativists, they're not realists. I mean, it's possible to think that people are they're like crypto realists, like on some deep level, they're realists. So if you look at the population in the United States, you get some people that are on some deep level realists, and then that manifests. They are realists. Like, let's say a bunch of Christians or the people talking in this video. They're moral realists. But then you have other people that on some deep level, they're moral realists, but then they go around espousing relativism. And then this causes some sort of social problems. Now, I don't know the causes of why society is in the poor state that it's in. Maybe individualism is contributing to that. Maybe these other sorts of factors are contributing to this. But is moral relativism contributing to this? Well, you got to be clear about what you mean by that. So it's unlikely that meta-ethical relativism as a distinct meta-ethical position is contributing to the poor state of society, because most people probably don't have views about meta-ethics, at least not about the realism, anti-realism divide. A lot of what you see with folk relativism is a confused amalgamation of descriptive claims about the existence of moral diversity or variation across societies, normative claims about the importance of tolerating other cultures, and perhaps in some cases, meta-ethical claims about, moral truth. But they're all mixed together. They're jumbled. They're not particularly coherent. This is, to the extent that we criticize such views, the meta-ethics aspect of them may be playing with the normative and descriptive views in ways that could cause social problems. I'm not going to go around saying philosophical views could not have negative social consequences, but we do have to be clear about what the views we're talking about are, who holds them, why they hold them, and what those negative consequences are. Those are, again, you want to say it with like maybe this should be like Dora the Explorer and I should put something up here. That's an empirical question. Maybe I should get a banner and like flash it on here. That'd be a cool idea, because those are empirical questions, and we're not in a position to know that relativism is harming people. I mean, even if we had good empirical evidence about the other things, what did he say? Individualism and something else. What we don't have are good measures of whether people are realists or not. The best around for relativism is the Collier-Sproul et al. Scale of moral relativism. Has that been used on a broad national basis to evaluate favor relativism? To my knowledge, no. And I don't know if it would scale up and remain a valid measure at the national level. I don't know. I don't think this work has been done. I don't see them appealing to it. We don't. In other words, we don't actually know whether relativism is harming society because we don't know what proportion of people are relativists, and we haven't operationalized relativism in any straightforward or clear way in order to see whether or not any particular proportion of the population are relativists, much less have we established some sort of causal association. We don't even have good correlational data on this. So the idea that we would be in some kind of position to be confident that relativism is causing social problems is kind of wild. It's a highly speculative empirical claim for which I know of very, very little empirical evidence. I can talk about the behavioral research on meta ethics. There's a Ryan Holyoke paper. There's the Young and Derwin paper. There's the Fisher et al. Paper. There's a few papers that look at behavior and how meta ethics influences people's behavior. I've criticized those papers in my work. I think that they have some methodological problems, but they are not even close to sustaining broad and general claims about the negative consequences of relativism on society. We're just not in a position to make claims like that.
Isn't that interesting? Well, that's meta ethics right there. There's the sense that if this is all just, up to me or just up to preferences in my society or whatever, it's not real. And that's just not going to guide me. That's not going to anchor me. Martin Seligman, who's another psychologist writing back in the 80s, said that people today are 10 times more susceptible to anxiety and depression is because in the past, people saw life as an arena in which you live for something that's bigger than you are and more important than you are. Well, another way to say that is something objective.
Is it though? Is it? I don't agree with that. So I was about to say, he might be right about that. It could be that, as Christianity, its stranglehold on the Western world declined, we've been left to this sort of we have this vacuum, right? So society and individuals who unified, we had a sense of community. You could weave a narrative there. I don't know how much I buy that narrative, but you could tell a story, and it might have some truth to it, that when there's some sort of unifying mythos or a set of beliefs and values for people to share in common, that this brings a sense of unity and harmony to a society, and that it has social benefits. Again, this is an empirical question. These are very, very difficult empirical questions because you have to weigh all those advantages against the potentially negative consequences when, the religion in question may promote violence or outgroup biases or various forms of bigotry or prejudicial attitudes towards people. So you have to weigh a lot of the pros and cons against one another, and it's a really tough empirical balancing act to do that. But even if you supposed that in some general sense, maybe it doesn't have to be Christianity, but in some general sense, having everybody unified around some greater purpose is galvanizing for people and inspiring for people and brings about positive consequences. That maybe that's true. Let's say for the sake of argument that's true. Is another way to put that is that it's subjective? No. People could have a shared purpose. People could all want to do something because they value it or because they care about it. It doesn't have to be objective. And so that's the jump that I think he's making. That's a mistake here. Even, in other words, in short, even if it's true that unifying everybody around some shared set of values or purpose that are greater than themselves, like they're not just hedonistic, they want to all travel the stars or aspire to something greater than any particular individual. Even if people had a shared common purpose or goal or values or aspirations, there's nothing about that would require that it be objective. And that's not synonymous. It's not just another way of putting it. So I don't think he's right about that.
Objectively good, objectively right. And as that has all just been kind of, flattened out, it's like we're lost. We don't have moorings and so on. So in terms of what difference it makes a huge difference in individual people's lives. And so it's worth it for us as Christians to want to help people have an objective grounding for their understanding of morality, not just to win points for them to them, but for their benefit, for their sake, for their flourishing, for their objective flourishing. that this is actually just like we would want people to operate in reality when it comes to their physical well-being, and not just, well, it doesn't matter what I eat or what I do with my body because it's just up to me. It's just like my ice cream. Well, it actually does matter. If we love people, we care about how they live. And so it's sort of like Sorokin's thing about societies collapsing that don't have any kind of robust commitment to moral values and ideals. So
Yeah.
that's practical.
You can have a robust commitment to moral values and ideals without being a realist, unless by robust he just means a commitment to realist values. But then that's just true. Hey, you you have to have realist commitments to have realist commitments. I that would not be very valuable of a point to make, and there would still need to be some sort of evidence that it's specifically thinking that morality is real in the realist sense that somehow has these social benefits. I don't know if any evidence that would support that. And it's just a lot of empirical presumptions here.
That's interesting. There's a sociology study, and I cannot remember the name to cite it, but I know that they looked at like younger children playing in front yards, and yards that were fenced. Children tended to be more gregarious, more active, because the safety of the border itself gave them a confidence to explore even to the edges of the yard. You take the fence away, and all of a sudden you get less motion, less movement, less understanding, because they don't want to, venture into the street, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
and if you've ever tried to play tennis without a fence around the court, you've experienced the same thing, right?
So they appeal to empirical evidence that I don't know what that study is, but it sounds plausible. I don't know if it's true. So they appeal to empirical evidence for that. Why not empirical evidence for whether or not people are moral realists and what the social consequences of that are? There are studies on this.
You're not going to go for it. You got to be very careful. And so, yeah, fences are good things. Objective constraints are good things.
And we seem to be wired that way. Paul Young, I know he was a sociologist out of Yale, I believe, who did experiments with children as young as 8 away balls. And we just have this built-in moral sense, even pre-verbal.
Having a moral sense doesn't mean that you have a realist moral sense. We also have a sense for food. Babies all through into adulthood, we care about food. We want to eat stuff. We have taste preferences. That doesn't mean gastronomic realism is true. So the fact that even if people had a moral sense, it wouldn't mean that they had a moral sense that disposes them towards moral realism or thinking of morality in realist terms. So again, there's so many conflations, and there's such inadequate and poor engagement with the irrelevant empirical sciences.
Verbal that we can sense, and we get anxiety when we see wrong things done to others.
Yeah,
so
exactly. And it does not help to grow up and take a class and learn that this is all a fiction. This is not making us less anxious. This is just making it worse. This is just saying, well, all those fences that you intuit, that you have a natural sense that are there, they're not real. They're just, figments of your imagination or leftovers from bad religion or something. That's actually not helping people.
So to go back to the student example that you gave, where she was trying to revert back to a relativist framework, when you teach these classes, when you get kids who are coming in, even Christian kids, a lot of them have swallowed the moral relativist understanding just because it's in the ethos, it's in the air. Do you find that examining these things can change a lot of minds? Is there something more personal you need to do? How do you see in these discussions, how do you change people's beliefs to something a little bit more objectivist?
Well, I teach it, and I think that does change minds. I mean, some people have said that because they just don't understand it. There's so many misconceptions about it. For a quick example, people think, well, if I think that morality is objective, then that's intolerant, because that means certain things are wrong, certain people are wrong. And I just.
He is completely right about this. So, there is, I really wish I could talk to more moral realists, especially non-naturalists and especially Christian moral realists, because, we could lock arms in common cause on a lot of the misconceptions among students and lay people generally when they are exposed to these ideas. So here is the common misconception. Some people seem to think that moral realism, in order to endorse moral realism or to be a moral realist, this suggests that you have some sort of rigid authoritarian view about your moral standards. So sometimes people think that it means that you're especially hardcore about your moral standards, you're uncompromising, you're inflexible, you're absolutist, you don't think there could be exceptions. Oh, if anybody steals, you got to throw them in prison. And it's like, well, the person was they were about to die and they stole let's say a person stole like an EpiPen from a pharmacy that they couldn't afford and to save their lives. Good for them. Like, but the realists would go, no, it's always wrong to steal. Nope. Moral realism has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. A moral realist could be very sensitive to contextual considerations. They don't have to be an absolutist. They don't super rigid. They could be fairly lackadaisical about their moral standards and principle. So nothing about realism entails any of that. So some people just misunderstand the implications of realism, and that might make it off-putting. But the same could be said for the way that they're characterizing relativism in this video, that it's characterized in ways that make it seem especially off-putting, that I think are misleading and unhelpful to people. So if you specifically point out agent relativism and point to its problems, okay, so a person, maybe we should all agree. Let's all agree. Nobody should be an agent relativist. Okay. What about the other anti-realist options? What's so horrific and terrible about appraiser relativism or Humean constructivism, or, take your pick on a variety of other anti-realist views? What's so terrible about those? I have yet to hear what's so terrible about them.
Just can't go there. And so I call that a wheelbarrow that's doing a bunch of work, derailing conversation, good thought. And so the tolerance thing is something that has to be brought up at some point and say, okay, what is it? What is tolerance really? Because it's just as long as it's vague and it's in the background, then it's just gonna keep people from being able to recognize and affirm that, yeah, their morality is objective. So you have to deal with those, bring them to the surface. Scientism is another one, that all that we can really know, all that's real is what science can tell us. And of course, science can't tell us morality, so that must not be real. So we have the book some. And then at some point, though, and it's usually, in personal conversation like that student I was talking about, it may be you need to poke a little more, strategically, and take a chance if it's a kind of hard-boiled person. I'll just mention, in a class, I had one year in this one class, I had a group of students that were kind of into postmodern relativism. And so I thought I'm gonna do one of those things for the class. So they had written this paper. So my TA and I brought in all the papers, the graded papers. That was back when you do it, with actual paper.
Manually, yeah.
Yeah, can you believe that? Some people listening to this might remember that, but
analog.
Yeah. So on the back, on the really good papers, we put the correct grade, A or whatever, and then on the front we put F or D- or something like that. And I handed them out, and I said, and I was just making this up as I went, but I said, I was really disappointed in these papers. I mean, they were well written, well argued, really convincing, but I just had to give him an F. And why did you give him an F? I said, well, because I didn't like the font you used.
This, he's saying he's actually did this. So these stories usually sound apocryphal to me. So I'd want to see some evidence. This was done. I'd like to, not that I'm saying he's not being honest here. But people have described these sorts of stories like, oh, a professor did this, but this is someone actually saying that they did do this. Let me take that back. Is he saying he actually did this?
And, I might remember that, but grade those things for the class. So they had written this paper. So my TA and I brought in all the papers, the graded papers. That was back when you do it, with actual paper.
Manually, yeah.
Yeah, can you believe that? Some people listening to this might remember that, but
Analog.
yeah.
Yeah, I've done handwritten papers. Yeah, these stories have always sounded apocryphal. So if he's actually done this, and I have no reason to doubt that he's done this, that would be really exciting to see this in practice, even though I think this is a pretty terrible thing to do to students. And I find it very objectionable to do this because I don't think it's a good demonstration of his point, which we'll get to. I'm just surprised to see someone say, I've done this, because usually people will say, I heard about someone doing this. Maybe he's the one everybody's heard about, which would be really cool. Well, I mean, it's like it's interesting and cool to have it confirmed that someone has actually done this exercise. But I still think it's a bad exercise, which I'll get to in a minute. And I've talked about this before because we've had people on the channel that have said, "Oh, there was a professor that did such and such." I think William Lane Craig tells a story like this.
Yeah. So on the back, on the really good papers, we put the correct grade, A or whatever, and then on the front we put F or D- or something like that. And I handed them out, and I said, and I was just making this up as I went, but I said, I was really disappointed in these papers. I mean, they were well written, well argued, really convincing, but I just had to give him an F. And why did you give him an F? I said, well, because I didn't like the font you used. And so then they're looking through the syllabus, it doesn't say anything in here about font. I said, well, why would I put it in the syllabus? I mean, I never know from day to day what kind of font I'm gonna like. Yeah, but that's not fair. I said, fair? Are you really interested in objective moral values now?
Well, see, this is why this is so ridiculous. So if you're a relativist, are you really interested in objective moral values? No, I'm interested in you being fair. You don't have to be a moral realist to care about fairness. Again, analogize to food. Okay, so I don't like disgusting, nasty food. I don't want it to be oversalted or burnt to a crisp or, I don't know, filled with cockroaches. So let's say you go to a restaurant, you order pizza, it comes out, it's covered in cockroaches. And you go, what the hell? This is disgusting. Ugh, I'm never going to eat here. And they go, and you say, this is gross. I'm not going to eat this. And then the waiter or the chef goes, gross. Oh, so you want to talk about gastronomic realism now? You want to presuppose that some things are stance independently gross? So the natural reaction from the person to go, what are you talking about? No, I'm not presupposing gastronomic realism. I find this gross and I don't want you to do it. I don't want you to put cockroaches on my pizza. So I couldn't a person say, look, I'm not a realist, but there are standards of fairness that I want to live by, and I would like you to live by them. I thought we were on the same page here. Nothing about relativism or anti-realism suggests that you don't or can't consistently care about fairness. So, for them to do this exercise is I mean, first of all, you're psychologically treating students in a way where you're terrifying them, making them feel bad. I think to use that as a lesson, one is probably just not going to be, I don't think that's okay. But even if for whatever reason, we just grant, even if it was okay and you're just going to do this, at least have a good lesson. What is the lesson here? That you shouldn't be an agent individual relativist about grading policies? Sure. Okay. So maybe they're not. What about the 50,000 other anti-realist positions they can endorse? So they could be one of the variety of types of expressivist. They could be one of a variety of types of appraiser relativist. They could be one of a variety of types of relation designated account proponents. They could endorse ideal observer theory, or there's probably comes in a variety of forms. They could be what else? Okay, we've got they could be some type of quasi-realist, some type of expressivist, some type of error theorist fictionalist. They could have no particular substantive or coherent view at all, but just not be an individual agent relativist. The idea that okay, so if you're an individual agent relativist, what you would think is, as long as a person thinks their own actions are morally permissible, then it is in fact permissible for them to treat other people that way. And so the lesson might be, okay, so if you're an individual agent relativist and you want to be consistent about it, if I, as the person grading you, decides to grade you, I think it's okay to grade you based on totally arbitrary stuff like your font and give you an F just because I don't like your font, you would have to regard that as morally permissible for me to do. Granted, okay, but are all the students specifically endorsing that form of relativism? And if so, how was that demonstrated and established? This is not a good exercise unless you could somehow show that. And even if that's the case, okay, so argue the students out of individual agent relativism. That doesn't show that they should be a realist. So the presumption here is what? You have to be an individual agent relativist or a moral realist. That is not a good way to teach students. It's not a good way to teach students because you're over dichotomizing things. You're making their options appear really limited. Just the question, oh, you care about fairness, so you must care about objective fairness. That doesn't follow. That just doesn't follow any more than if you care about the taste of your food, you must be a gastronomic realist. It just doesn't follow. And for professionals that are in charge of grading students, it's pretty upsetting to see people use these standards. So, they may see this video, the people, I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm not going to yell and scream at you, but what you did is, I think, wrong. I don't think what you did is appropriate, because I think you're not adequately presenting students with the range of available meta-ethical options to them that are available to them. And you're, potentially upsetting students in order to teach a lesson that I don't think is a particularly good lesson. So this is pretty, I'm not happy with this. This is not a cool thing to do to students.
Because I thought you thought this was just a construction that,
Yeah. So if you think it's a construction, why would that mean you don't care about fairness? So, let's say you have a totally practical intersubjective basis for the law. Hey, let's all agree to follow these particular laws because it's beneficial for our society to follow these laws. And then someone breaks the law, and then you go to arrest them, and they're like, well, I thought you said it was constructed, so it's not real. What the hell? What do you mean it's not real? If, our use of money, that's constructed. It's still real. Constructed things aren't fake. If, if you are playing a game with someone, let's say you're playing chess, and they start just moving the pawns wherever they want. I checkmated with the pawn moving at 6 places diagonally. And you go, whoa, those aren't the rules. Well, the rules are constructed, so they're not real, so I can do whatever I want. Do you see how easy this is to satirize, to make a, to make a parody of this? This idea that it's constructed so it's not real, or it's constructed so it doesn't matter and I can do whatever I want. None of that follows. None of that follows. You do not need realism in order to care about things, in order to have attitudes, in order to express those attitudes. And I don't need a justification for expressing an attitude of, hey, I'd like you to grade me the way that we all agree is fair, or whatever. You don't have to be a realist about it. And if they disagree, you could still argue. So if someone says, if someone disagrees with, about, like, let's say your professor gives you a bad grade and you think you ought to get a better grade, and, they disagree with you and they are sincere, they're not pulling a stunt like this. Are you somehow not entitled to argue with them, even if there's no objective standard? It's not like there's a set of stance-independent standards for proper grading procedures. These are semi-constructed. Instructors make up their grading procedures. And that doesn't mean they're not real, or you can't argue or contest with them. So people can contest the rules of games. People can argue about their preferences. People can argue about, let's say you funded, let's say you're an investor and you put a bunch of money into a big Hollywood movie, and the movie's terrible. Nobody wants to watch it. It sucks. It would be ridiculous for the person to respond, bad movie? Are you presupposing cinematic realism? Well, how can you do that? Whatever movie I make is as good as any other if you're not a realist about, the cinema. You don't have to be a realist because they wasted your damn money. So you could be angry about that. You're not incorrect to be angry if they wasted your money and you don't get a good return on your investment. And if someone gives you a bad grade, this can mess up your GPA. It can make it harder for you to get into a good grad school or to land a good job. And so they are causing practically bad things for you in your life, potentially. And so that's something that you could be mad about. And you don't need a justification to be mad about that any more than you need a justification to like strawberry ice cream. You like what you like, you care about what you care about. And people care about their lives and their futures and how they're going to go. And you don't need a philosophical justification to act on their goals and values. And if someone is giving you a bad grade in a way that you consider indefensible relative to your standards, you have every business objecting to that. So this exercise is not a good exercise.
And I said, welcome to the world of relativism. I'm the professor.
That's not the world of relativism. That's the world of individual agent relativism. It's not the world of cultural agent relativism. It's not the world of appraiser relativism, both individual and cultural. It's not the world of any type of constructivism. It's not the world of uh, any sort of relation designating account like ideal observer theory. So there are a variety of constructivist positions that this sort of move wouldn't make any sense on. If you're an appraiser relativist, you judge people relative to your standards. And so if someone gives you a grade that you consider unfair, it's not only consistent, but it's just constitutive of what the account is, that it's wrong relative to your standards. And so if someone gives you an F because of the font and you consider that wrong, it's wrong relative to your standards. And that's true. So, this is, I don't know what is up with critics of relativism having this like weird caricature version of it in their minds.
The power, and what I say goes. And that's all. That's the end of the debate. We can't appeal to things like fairness, truth.
Relativism is not the view that there's no such thing as fairness. Relativism is not the view that there's no such thing as truth. It's an explicit feature of relativism that there is moral truth. So to say there's no such thing as truth if you're a relativist is false. This is a misrepresentation of relativism. Relativism does not bar you from having normative moral standards regarding fairness. Relativism does not bar you from having views about what's morally true or false. He himself presented realism in the classical way as pointing out that it involves a type of cognitivism. Cognitivism in metaethics is the view that moral utterances are propositions, meaning that they're capable of being true or false. Moral realism is typically construed in contemporary analytic metaethics as a type of cognitivism. You know what else is also considered a type of cognitivism, and therefore is a view according to which moral utterances are propositions capable of being true or false? Relativism. Relativism is a cognitivist view according to which moral claims can be true or false. And the other component of relativism, it's a view about what it is that makes moral claims true or false. They're true or false relative to the standards of individuals or groups. It's a view about the nature of moral truth. So this idea that there's no moral truth if you're a relativist it's bollocks. It's not true. So, a realist might think, well, as a realist, I think the only legitimate type of moral truth would be objective moral truth. So if you're a relativist, you don't believe in moral truth. Okay. But if you're a relativist, you don't think that only the objectivist view of moral truth is the only legitimate view of moral truth. In fact, you think it's false, and that the correct view of moral truth is the relativist view of moral truth. So if you're a relativist, the objectivist who thinks there's objective moral truth is incorrect. There's actually only relative moral truths. So if you're a relativist, the only moral truths that there are relativist moral truths. So his objection, he's presenting relativism to these students under the presumption realism is true. So that's not showing a full-blown commitment to relativism. If he were fully committed to relativism, he would actually act like and speak like a relativist, but he's actually speaking like a moral realist that's caricaturing relativism. And hey, guess what? He is a realist caricaturing relativism. So it's funny that he's acting exactly like that and not acting like a relativist would. So this is not a good way of characterizing relativism. This is not an accurate characterization of what the view is committed to or what its implications are. It might be a somewhat accurate characterization specifically of a very narrow form of relativism that includes both metaethical and normative content. That's agent individual relativism. But this is not an accurate characterization of appraiser relativism or of relativism more generally. And no explicit distinction has been made to draw out the different forms of relativism and to show that some of them are flawed and some of them are not, or that some of them are flawed in one way and some of them are flawed in another way. This is just taken to be presumptively characteristic of relativism in its entirety, which is not accurate. So this is at best highly misleading with several inaccurate remarks made about relativism. So, it's really, really frustrating when I see professionals not accurately represent relativist views. It's just really frustrating. It's one thing for lay people to make these mistakes. It's another for professionals to make these mistakes. So, again, I don't know if they're going to see this video, and maybe they'll take umbrage at me making such, critical remarks. But what am I wrong about? Are these what these other types of relativism just don't matter? A person can't endorse those. So if the claim is, oh, well, the students are endorsing agent relativism, how do you know that? And how was that established?
Those are objective moral values. And then I said, and oh, by the way, it was just a joke. The right scores on the back. but I think it was a wake up call for a number of them. It was, again, one of those kind of vivid things that sometimes you have to do to just kind of, oh yeah, that's what this actually amounts to.
It's an actual entire package. You can't pick and choose.
Yeah,
that's part. Well, David, thank you so much. The book is
All right. That's it for the video. So let's see what else he has to say.
Meta Ethics, a short companion.
Okay. Check
It's
out the
part
book.
of the Essentials in Christian Ethics
Look,
series.
I know that I'll take it back for him to give the whole account of the book, like the description of the book. As critical as I am of the views here, I do think everybody involved in these discussions should, I get animated, but I'm happy to have sit down and have a chat with people. Maybe people have the impression that I'd bite somebody's head off argumentatively. I don't really think so. I get animated about the stuff because I care about it. I could be wrong about stuff. I'm wrong about stuff all the time. I was in a couple debates this past week where I just made basic errors. I make mistakes. I forget stuff. I don't know stuff. I'm ignorant of certain things. I goof certain things up. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's wrong about certain things. Everybody has disagreements about things. And that's all fine. As long as we're getting along and we're making progress and we're talking to one another and we're moving forward and working on these issues. But, one of my goals is to make sure that people give a more charitable and accurate characterization of the anti-realist views that are available rather than just sort of presenting it in what I think is often a rather underdeveloped and dismissive way. And I do think that that's motivating this. I think that they are so confident in realism that they're just not treating anti-realist views with the level of respect I think that they deserve. And maybe they don't think they deserve that respect, or maybe they think they are treating them as respectfully as they're obliged to treat them. I don't agree. I think these views are highly defensible. They're a lot more diverse and a lot more defensible than critics of anti-realist views give them credit for. Anyway, that being said, I think it makes sense for me to play this because I do encourage you to go check out books from people that completely disagree with me. I'd love for you to read those books. Tell me what you think of them. I'd be happy to discuss them. If anything, maybe I should go around telling people to read all the books that disagree with me. Although I do think people should read ones that agree with me too. But I like that back and forth. I like that exchange. I want to win all these battles and arguments. And 50 years from now, everybody say Lance was right about everything. But for now, I love to talk to people that disagree. So let them wrap this up, and then I'll get going. I might do a second stream later today as well. So we'll see.
To just kind of, oh yeah, that's what this actually amounts to.
It's an actual entire package. You can't pick and choose.
Yeah,
that's part. Well, David, thank you so much. The book is Meta Ethics, a short companion. It's part of the Essentials in Christian Ethics series put out by B&H academic J.P. Moreland and Dr. David Horner are the authors. We will put a link to the book in the description here so you can grab it. If you want a reference for this kind of thing, good, strong foundation, this is definitely the book to get. Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Well, I'll just reiterate that our common moral experience, kind of our deepest awareness of morality, points to moral realism. That morality is real, it's objective, we can know it, and that points to a kind of robust understanding of a robust Christian realism as the best and most satisfying and fulfilling basis for understanding and actually living morality.
Well, thanks so much. Now, you've done a lot of work on the transcendentals as well.
Okay, so I think that's a good place to wrap it up. All right, everybody. I am about to go have dinner. I made some mapo tofu, so I'm going to go have that. I don't know why I'm telling you that in particular. So I might do another stream. I might look at the Isaac so Ask Yourself the Majesty of Reason discussion about the intelligibility of morality and their respective views. So that would be cool to do. I don't have much else to say. And I don't see people throwing things like questions at me in the chat. So thanks everybody for being here. And I'll just wrap this video up early, I guess. And I'll see you all in a bit. Yeah. All right. And so like the video, subscribe, leave comments, do all that stuff. And I will catch you all later. And thanks for, I got through, this was an hour and 10 minutes and it only took me 3 videos. So I'm getting better at this, actually get through it. All right, everybody. Well, we did skip a lot of it. Okay. Anyway. All right, everybody. See you all later.